Who really knows what's the truth? Often dignified, how funny changing the tide. It feels like you already knew. Like the devil, you would never run in circles. Feels like you already knew. Like the devil, you would never run in circles. Feels like you already knew. Say you, I would never.
Good evening, everyone, and just give me a moment here, and then if I don't choke to death, let me start the recording, and then we shall proceed with the Liberty Talk.
The Constitution isn't just a document. It's a blueprint for freedom. We're breaking down politics at every level, exposing government overreach, and going where the mainstream media surely won't. Join us in defending individual rights against the bureaucratic tide. You're listening to the Missouri Liberty Report.
All right, folks, we are back with another edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Unfortunately, my co-host had some other things going on this evening, and so he could not make it. So you just got me and my lovely nasally voice to go through the next, excuse me, the next hour and a half or however long I can make it. Let me get a drink and clear my throat here. All right, let me start that over. You know, allergy, I don't know, the pollen, the mold is really high, and my allergies are going absolutely bonkers, and it is driving me absolutely bat you know what crazy. All right, so what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, we have a myriad of things that we could talk about. I posed a question in my Friday night rant video that I did, and I was kind of joking, but I'm also kind of serious. And that is because if we all go back to the 2024 election cycle, whether it was national level or a governor's race, even some state level races that, you know, rep, Senate, there was this, we cannot let the Chinese buy farmland in Missouri. We have to protect Missouri from the Chinese buying up all the farmland. That was just the mantra, the Republican mantra. Going on. And John Grady makes a good point. He says data centers are becoming huge corporate welfare projects. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But yes, we were told by Republicans that we had to be aware and be scared of the Chinese buying up all of the just Missouri farmland in just swaths, right? Just thousands upon thousands of acres of Missouri farmland was going to be owned by the Chinese. But then we have outfits like Jeffco, Patriot Radio, and Tim Jones and people of his ilk on that show, or whatever show they're doing there. I don't know if this is a podcast thing, what it is. I just see clips on Facebook constantly saying that, or not constantly, but they talk a lot about we have to build these data centers, and we have to do it because if we don't, the Chinese will beat us to the technology. Now, let's just think about that for a minute, shall we? Let's just all calm down about the farmland and think about the data centers. Because now, instead of beating the Chinese away from our farmland, we have to beat them to this technology boom that these data centers are going to bring us, supposedly. I say they're for the surveillance state. And yes, AI goes into that surveillance state, but I'm saying that they want these data centers will be used to be more helpful in tracking our everyday movements, our purchases, what we say on the internet, our phone calls, our text messages, emails, all these different things. That's what I believe they're there to do. I believe that wholeheartedly. And it's just awful strange to me that these Republicans that are so small, they preach from dusk till dawn, day in, day out, how conservative they are and how they like limited government. I shared a clip with Brandon and Tom Martz. And, Jim Jones was just former Missouri Speaker of the House, Jim Jones, just seemed baffled how these bills, these hodgepodge of different subject bills get all stuck together and get, passed through it towards the end of the session. And he was just like, yeah, it's just, what does this have to do with the other thing? And I'm like, dude, you have pushed for bills like that, being the leader of the Missouri Freedom Caucus, telling people they should support certain bills that have 14 other things in there that don't have anything to do with the subject of the bill. So for him to act astonished, really, it really tickled me. I found that quite amusing. And so, but yeah, the Jim Jones types are out there and saying to us that we really need to be careful and not just say no data centers, because we have to get ahead of China in this technological front. And, one of the first things that springs to mind is the fact that are we trying to catch up with them or get ahead of them in like social credit scores? And, again, so if we say things they don't like, do things they don't like, then they shut off our accounts. Or with this new cars, 2027, with this, it sees if you're intoxicated, they just shut your car off and you can't drive. And to me, if you're a so-called conservative, or as some of my friends like to call them, conservatives, why would you be pushing so hard for data centers? It doesn't make any difference. I will say that the Jim Joneses of the world and other things are deeply embedded with lobbyist organizations. And so they're going to want to do what their lobbyist friends want. And so they are going to try to convince their audience that these data centers are not so bad. Here's the problem. The problem is that Festus is in Jefferson County, and Festus recalled every single alderman that voted to bring in the data center on that 360 acres. And so these guys are out of Jeffco, and they're trying to kind of sing the praises. Now, there's some caveats. You're like, well, if they're not hogging up resources or not doing this thing or that thing, then we should be able to we should allow them to build. But the problem is that these companies, yes, they will, the Festus was supposed to get I think $1.5 million for a firefighter's building, and they were looking at, was it $15 million? It's Tim Jones. You're right, Tom. I'm calling him Jim Jones, and it's Tim Jones. But yeah, you're right. Keep calling him Jim Jones, as it fits perfectly. I apologize. I don't know why I call him that, but he is trying to get you to drink the Kool-Aid. So Jim Jones is trying to get you, hey, thanks to Tom, we now have a new nickname for former Speaker Tim Jones. We will call him Jim Jones, because he's trying to get you to drink the Kool-Aid. But it is funny that these guys are in Jefferson County or broadcasting out of Jefferson County or however they're doing this. And they're actively trying to downplay and get people to change their mind on data centers in a county where there is a city that said, we are so fed up with our city alderman not listening to us that we didn't reelect them, and actively trying to recall the mayor. I believe that's still a thing because the mayor was for it too. And so you have this group of people who are so-called conservatives constantly talking about data centers. And so John Grady says Montgomery County has 2 hyperscale 1,000-acre sites, Google and Amazon. They gave a 70% tax abatement to the data centers on property taxes for 25 years. Now, to me, and this leads back to Republicans shooting themselves in the foot. To me, you can't go preaching smaller government and responsible government and all this stuff, and then have, because I guarantee you Montgomery County is not a Democrat. It's not a part of a Democrat district. In fact, it might be, I don't know. I think part of it falls within the district that I live in. I think. I could be wrong, but I believe at least part of Montgomery County falls into that district. So if you're preaching small government and fiscal responsibility and all these other things, why would you give them a 70% tax abatement on property taxes for 25 years? Why would you do that? Now, I'm sure they got some promises made to them to be able to put these things in. And if you remember last week's episode, that we brought up the thing where they were having a meeting there in Jeff City, but no one from the general public is allowed. It was the teachers, like the Missouri State Teachers Association, I believe, or Missouri School Association, something was invited, some other groups. But if you were a vendor, if you were a some type of company, and the general public were not allowed at these meetings over data centers. And they had a whole list of things that, they were going to talk about. And I think it was basically is, how do you trick your constituents? How do we lead them to believe that even if we bring these data centers in, that it won't suck up all the resources, you won't get screwed on your utilities, you won't get stuck with a higher tax burden, all these things. And so, again, why are you bringing the Missouri schools in? That one just blew me away. I'm pretty sure I saved that. Let me see if I saved it or I sent it to somebody, something, because I was just like, what is this? Maybe I sent it. Let's see. Well, I can't find it, so I don't know what I did with it. That sucks. But oh, you know what? I bet I know where it's at. Let me do something else here, because I think Shield Maidens of Missouri had it up on their page. So let me go back and find that, because that I shouldn't have to search very long and hard for this. But you never know. They do post quite a bit of stuff. And oh yes, here we go. So vendors, corporate partners, and members of the public are not permitted, but you had the Missouri Association of Counties, the Missouri Municipal League, and Missouri School Board Association. It was for them. So get the schools to talk it up to the kids that go to their school district, so they can come home and tell the parents how good the data centers are. The Missouri Municipal League is all about zoning and all that stuff, so they're going to be all in, trying to finagle in. Even they're the ones that love the enhanced enterprise zones as well, which are bad news. And then the Missouri Association of Counties. So all those people, all those folks are invited, but the general public cannot come in and make comments. And so I found that rather hilarious. But I am seriously posing the question, did Republicans try to bait Missourians into fighting off Chinese-owned farmland, or was that I mean, part of that's propaganda and scare tactics. I know that, you know. But my serious question is, did they do that to get people to secure their farmland, but then we trick them and make them think data centers are better, and we bring in data centers, which are resource hogs. They're promised all, again, tax abatements, everything else. They're big, they're just big welfare projects, corporate welfare projects. That's what John Grady calls them. I agree. They're corporate welfare projects. And it is just, it boggles the mind. But it doesn't boggle my mind. If you're generally voting Republican, though, this should boggle your mind. Nothing these people do anymore surprises me. Nothing they do, I don't go, wow, I can't believe they're doing that. No, I rarely say that anymore. They have to go way out in a left field for me to go, I can't even believe they did that. Wow, I'm even shocked. What would shock me is if they started adhering to the document and the that they swear an oath to. That would blow me away. I would fall out of my chair in a live stream if I suddenly saw that 80% of the time they're voting everyone in the Republican Party is voting constitutionally. I would probably stroke out in my chair, and that would be the end of this show. Other than that, nothing that these freak jobs do shocks me in the least bit. And they are becoming more numerous. You know, I saw somebody say something the other day. Somebody made a post on one of the social media sites that said the federal government needed to limit how much these billionaires could donate to candidates. Limited to $5,000. Now, I didn't comment on the post, but I did want to tell them that, hey, we did that in Missouri. It's called Clean Missouri. And that money just went from direct funding to PACs. And now lobbyist organizations are creating PACs, funding the candidates so they can get what they want legislatively, either to block freedom type legislation or pass absolute dog crap bills, you know, big omnibus bills or whatever. But we did Clean Missouri because that was supposed to clean up the corruption in the campaign funding, and it made it 10 times worse. And another thing that gets brought up along that same front is term limits. Republicans love to bring up term limits. You look at 99% of Republicans that go to DC, they might vote somewhat conservatively, and I'm using that phrase loosely, somewhat conservatively. But when it gets towards and they decided that they're going to just retire and go work as a lobbyist, they'll vote for anything horrible that springs to mind. So if you impose term limits in Washington, D.C., that like somewhat, you know, like voting right on a couple issues goes away because they know they have a short time to make a lot of money and, you know, grow their wealth and their power base. So they're going to be horrible way faster. You're not going to change the landscape in DC by giving them term limits. They're just going to be awful human beings right off the bat. Instead of that last year, like Roy Blunt, who just went all out. Now, he was terrible to begin with, but he just got even worse towards the end on things he would vote yes for, which generally he wouldn't do because it was a way to keep his constituents invested in him and voting for him so he could go back to Washington, D.C. and fight to fix these things that are bad. So it's not like he was a real conservative champion or a constitutional champion. He just knew how to play people. He knew how to play and tug on their heartstrings and get them buying all the BS to keep people voting for him. And again, because his name's Roy Blunt, and every time election come around, well, good luck knocking off. It's like basically pulling a tick off that's deeply embedded. People just don't do it. They're like, well, you know what? It ain't worth it. I'll just leave it there. Suck the life force right out of me. But so deeply embedded that, and you get that name recognition. People are like, well, he's been there. He knows what's going on. I'll just check his name again. But I know I've been beating up on Republicans a lot on this show lately, but in this state and at the federal level, but they deserve it. They wholeheartedly deserve any bad thing generally that gets said about them, and any thrashing they get from people who are not in the mainstream media. People want to get on and trash Trump and some of these other, high-ranking Republican officials or people in the Trump administration. They deserve every ounce of what they're getting. And it's disappointing because we have to do better than what we are doing right now as far as the types of people we elect in this state. Because after Thomas Massie got knocked out in the primary, the feds can go, they can go just take a hike. And those people in Kentucky that blindly voted for Gal Rain, those people can go take a hike. But in this state and on our local levels, we have to do better. And the Jim Joneses of the world need a good thrashing on social media when they post these things about data centers in a county with the city of Festus, part of that county, that the people spoke there and said, we don't want this. We don't want this data center. You didn't listen. You all lost your jobs. Good day. And then you have people within broadcasting out that it's not so bad. We have to do better than that. We have to call them out on their nonsense. And we have to stop electing them based on the letter behind their name. And if you have, this is just my thoughts, right? This is my opinion. Take it for what it is. If you have a district for State House, take for example, and there is a Republican and there is a Libertarian running in that district, and you know that the Libertarian, his foundation is good, his principles are sound, and it's someone you can depend on, give your vote to the Libertarian. If there's no, especially if there's no Democrat running against them. And even if the Republican still wins, but it's a narrow margin, at least you put a little bit of fear into them. And I'm going to say this too. If you have a Democrat who's running against a Republican and they're not totally bonkers, maybe that Republican needs to lose that election too. Because I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of Republicans in this state that don't deserve to be reelected. They don't. They've proven themselves to lie. They've proven themselves to be manipulative. Now, there are a couple. I can think of two Republicans right now that I would reelect, and those are Brian Wolfen and Mike Moon, because they seem to stand much more on principles, and their principles align more with what I believe, and they align with how I think an elected official should act over most of the others. That's just me. I'm not saying everybody has to believe the same thing I do, but if you wonder how we got here and why we continue to keep going in this direction, you cannot suddenly go, well, I'm still have to vote for a Republican. I can't just vote for a Democrat, or I can't vote for a third party candidate because that might give the seat to somebody else. Well, if enough of you grow a spine and decide that you've had it with the people who a lot of say one thing, do another, and you finally get fed up with it, and you finally decide to pull your vote away from that, that's the only way you're going to make waves with these people, is to take their seats away. Make them actually earn it. Stop just pretending like continually voting for them because they have again, an R or D behind their name is going to solve anything. And this goes both ways. Democrats, if you vote Democrat and you can't figure this out by now, that the Democrats take their talking points from someone up the food chain, and this is what they're going to work on, and they all buy in, and they all say the same thing, rinse and repeat, and you keep choosing to do that, and nothing changes, and I know their excuse is, well, the Democrats don't control the chambers and the governor's, office, so we're not going to get what we want. You're still not going to get what you want. I mean, if you want higher taxes and you want to continue reckless spending and welfare programs that steal wealth from one group of people and give it to another, I mean, yeah, you'll get that. But if you don't, if that's your principle, then you need your head examined to begin with. But that also goes for Republicans. If you're only voting for them because you think that they're 100 times better than a Democrat, but they come up with a plan to eliminate the Missouri income tax. Well, they come up with legislation to put on the ballot to eliminate the income tax without a real plan, and you just have to trust them for 3 years. Or, they pass bloated omnibus bills that contain 30 different pieces of legislation in one thing, or 5 or 6 or whatever. If you keep voting for that, you're going to continue to get what you get. So either start doling out votes to somebody else, or you're going to have to wallow in the mud and the filth that filters out of that building in Jefferson City, the Capitol. You will continue to have to wallow in that. I know I don't really have any power sitting behind this microphone. I am relaying to you my thoughts on liberty and freedom. That's what I do. And I try to, we talk about the stories that affect us from the state level, national level, but I just can't say it enough that at some point, a large percentage of the population is going to have to decide to educate themselves and stop just voting for a letter and start voting for actual principles. This can go at your local level too. Local level, I've heard the people, well, I know that name, check. Okay, cool. Do you know anything else about them? Do you know what they do? Do you know how they're voting? Do you know what they feel about tax, generating more tax revenue and coming up with more things that the city has to take care of and fund? Or do you just say, well, I know, I grew up with them, so check. I've grown up with a lot of people, but politically, I don't align with them at all. If they ran for office and I knew their platform, I wouldn't vote for them just because I grew up with them. I mean, politics tends to be a good old boys club, and the voters tend to be in that too. Voters tend to get into a good old boys club as well. And it sucks. And frankly, I'm quite sick of it. But, what else am I going to do, right? Just sit here and go crazy, I guess. I mean, take, for instance, this, right? Now, this was post, I believe Maisie Christensen reposted this thing from Trisha Burns, who is in the House, but is now running for Senate. So lobbyists should not be making our laws. We need conservatives willing to stand up against them. That is a direct quote from Trisha Burns. So lower taxes, protect children, defend the Constitution, support farms and small business, hold government accountable, secure elections and borders, bring back books, protect women's sports, fight property taxes, support law enforcement, pro-life. I went and looked at her constitutional score from 2025 because in her thing, it says defend the Constitution. Do you know what her score was? 21% constitutional scoring from the Lock and Smith Foundation. 21%. But this person will post all these things. And you can go on to the Lock and Smith Foundation's site, legiscore.us. You can go to that site and see her score. I'll actually bring it up for you so you can see it in the video. As soon as the web page loads here, I will bring up her score. And this is one instance of one person in Jeff City right now that says those things. And then let's see, where is she at? She's okay. There, I'll share the page here real quick. So if you look for 96th, Trisha Burns, right? Trisha Burns. I want to make sure. Yep, that's the same name. Trisha Burns. Make it full screen here. Come on, maximize the screen. Come on, you can do it. Well, it's not going to do it because it wants to be a dirty turd. But anyway, Trisha Burns, 21.67% constitutional voting score. So is that what we're talking about when we say defend the Constitution? Again, that is one example, folks, of a person who is preaching this and can't vote constitutionally 78.33% of the time. Can't do it. Don't put those people back in. If you find someone who's better, that can be challenging. I get it. That's not the easiest job in the world. But send them packing. Send them packing. They need to go bye-bye. And, you know, all this stuff of, we gotta, you know, I don't know. I got to go back and look because I found that. And then now I can't. All right. You know what? Now I have to go back and do it again. Because I'm pretty sure that was on Shield Maiden's page. So let me go back. I know it was because I was just there, dummy. Yeah, bring back books. Fight property taxes. The typical Republican talking points. I'll just share the screen so everybody can see this. So no one thinks I'm making this up. Right? But there it is right there. All that stuff right there. And I mean, am I lying? Of course I'm not. I'm not making this up. It's all right there. But you can go look at her score and see that she's not anywhere close to constitutional. So either find somebody better Don't go vote. I don't know. It'd be weird if she only got like 2 votes. People are like, what's going on? But figure out something. If she would have had something about education on there, I would have given her flack for that too. But yeah. So you have that from Republicans, right? Now, the Herzog Foundation gets a lot of attention from Democrats in Missouri, especially when it comes to school funding, because they swear up and down the Herzog Foundation is trying to defund public schools and send it all to private schools. So you get this type of video right here. Let me share my screen and let me play this for you.
The Herzog Foundation is working to dismantle our public schools right before our eyes, and they've already bought influence with too many elected officials, both on the state and federal level. We know this. What we also know is their strength in numbers. That's why my fellow candidates in District 7, 8, and 9 are making a clear promise.
Public schools are the heart of our community, and they mean so much more than just education. I will never take a cent from the people who are trying to strip their funding. I'm Adrian Cooper, and I stand for the people of District 7.
I will never take a cent from people working to steal public funds from public schools. My name is Amy Minnick, and I'm fighting for House District 8.
As a retired Missouri public school teacher, I know how important funding our public schools is. And I promise you, I will never accept 1 cent from any organization who is taking money from our public school coffers. My name is Gina Puckett, and I stand with House District 9.
So there you have that. And that was just all, that sounded canned. Everybody, well, except for Puckett, hers, but the first two, they sounded like someone else wrote that for them. And so the fight for public schools versus private schools goes on and on in Missouri. If the Missouri Constitution states that you will not take money and give it to, especially if they're Christian schools, that goes against the state constitution. You can't do that. If that's what Republicans are doing, they should have their little hand slapped for that. They should lose their jobs. These people inherently, they freak out mainly because the thought of public schools going away really just scares the bejesus out of them. They like the public schools. They love the government run indoctrination centers. Every year they want to see the budget increase. There's no budget limit to them that just would seemingly fix everything. I believe that the education budget went down by $190 million this year. Compared to the $8 billion, $190 million is a drop in the bucket. But you'll see these people freaking out about their shrinking school budgets and how they're going to have to make cuts. And I know I stated this last week, but when do we get to a point where we demand that government entities and government agencies actually take a financial hit? When do we get to a point where we're like, hey, you know what? We have a central bank that devalues our currency, creates inflation through deficit spending, the printing of trillions of dollars, ceaseless wars, and we have to take a financial hit. But when you guys are coming up with a little bit of a shortfall, I suddenly should start sobbing uncontrollably and doing everything I can to screw over my financial situation so that you guys continue to get all the money that you could ever want. Again, this, in my world, this makes no sense. That I as a citizen whose money is stolen from me, basically, to fund entities that I'm not a fan of, and then when you have a little bit of a shortfall, I'm supposed to have a full-blown panic attack. When, here's the thing, folks. I've heard politicians, there's recordings of politicians out there, people like Hillary Clinton, amongst others. And believe me, it's more than just a few of these politicians, especially Democrats, who believe that when your children come to school, they are wards of the state, that your children belong to them in that building. Those children are not yours in that building. They belong to that school district, to government indoctrination centers, and they have to have you thinking that so they can pump their head full of absolute BS. And the only time you're not supposed, of course, if you wanted to bring religion into schools, then you should be absolutely outraged and you should scream to the heavens. And I don't think necessarily that you need to be teaching religion in schools. I think that's just like a lot of other education that is for the home. But if you try to teach kids that there's almond sexual things and you put that on a board somewhere, you should not fight against that, because that, if you do that, you're homophobic, transphobic, or whatever. So they're very hypocritical people. But they want to fill your children's heads full of nonsense, not teach them the correct history, not teach them good life skills, but teach them how to be good little drones. The problem is there are an awful lot of Republicans that fight for control of public schooling, and they want to insert their own type of stuff into the curriculum at the school. So it's a power play. People got to get this through their heads too. It is a power play. And these folks they want to control DESE. They want to control the curriculum, but they don't really want to solve the issues at hand, because they consider that political suicide, because too many people in this country, across the United States of America, are so entrenched in thinking that public schools are the best route, that if you even consider really saying, hey, let's go more private, or let's do more homeschooling, you will have people that are supposedly Republicans will freak out, and they'll say, no, you can't take away schools now. We can't take away public schools. So both people that follow both parties would be completely against just defunding public schools and making it go back to local control. So one side can make fun of the other, but they're both seemingly entrenched. It's just the voters also want to say, in what gets taught in schools, but even some of the things that they would do would go against the Constitution and fly in the face of logic. Because again, they grew up in public school. Their parents grew up in a public school. Maybe their parents went to a public school. So it's just this, well, my parents went and I went, my kids are going. I don't see a big deal. But, they freak out at other things. And they just want to control the curriculum. And I'm just here to fund the whole thing. It is not, unless the public at large wises up to what is actually going on and fights for more local control, this is a failed thing and it should be scrapped. And it should just come down to the local level, or a lot of people should start homeschooling or whatever. And you say that, people are like, oh, them homeschool kids. Listen, I've met and worked with and went to school with people who were homeschooled. And like a couple of them I went to school with, like their last year of school, they wanted to go to a public school for their last year and graduate, right? Most of those kids were ahead of the rest of us. A lot of them are very, very smart. In this instance, they like to take a few people that are, parents that are lazy. They don't want to put their kids in public school, but they suck at teaching them at home. And they're taking those few examples and making that seem like that's the norm. That is not the norm. That is not. I know way too many people that have homeschooled their kids to know that is not the norm. But you can't look at public schools as a whole and say, now that is a winning formula. When you see the GPAs and you see the amount of school districts who lower the passing grades or lower the expectations for the kids to get them through and get them graduated. That's not a winning formula. So how can you look at this issue at a national level across multiple states, see the news articles and all the coverage on what these governors do and across these states, and look at that and go, now that's winning. Really? Well, I hate to see what losing looks like if that's what you consider winning. But again, people are so indoctrinated. And if you start talking about defunding education, a lot of people lose their minds, freak the hell out. And it's like, no, calm down. And again, Democrats and even a lot of Republicans don't want you to understand how much you don't need the government. That scares them more than anything else. If people figured out how little of government they actually needed, oh my God, that's the most frightening thing to them, to be seen as useless or what have you. And, you know, when we're talking about Democrats, Republicans, or whatever, I have this post that I saw the other day, and this came from like the Columbia Heartbeats, whatever that is. Columbia, Missouri Public School Board of Education is expected to approve a 6% salary increase, $15,000, for Superintendent Jeff Klein on Monday. Meanwhile, the school board is doggedly pursuing a lawsuit to keep competition, i.e. charter schools, out of Columbia, Missouri, to ensure public education decisions in Boone County are made by people who are accountable to the voters and the families that live here, Board President John Lyman said in a Missouri Independent story. Superintendent Klein currently makes $255,000 per year, and the increase would bump it to $270,000 for the 2026-27 school year. Klein is also eligible for a 6% increase, $16,218 next year, bringing it to $286,518. Well, gee, I wonder why they wouldn't want private schools or charter schools. They have to justify a $270,000 a year salary. Why are superintendents making $270,000 a year? Why? Why are we paying them that much? Why are they getting contracts for that much money? I think Owensville gets $125,000, $130,000 a year. For Owensville, that's pretty good salary. Why? Now, he said that, you know, you have charter schools, or if you had private schools, and it's like you can't hold them accountable. But if parents are paying tuition to send their kids to those schools, they have a voice. Because if kids get pulled out in droves and they're not getting any tuition money, the school fails. You actually have a better chance of holding that school accountable if you have to pay tuition for your child to attend, rather than money being extorted from you every year by a government institution. And then, of course, with the No Child Left Behind and all these other pieces of junk legislation that have been pushed through at the federal level, you don't have the accountability there. I mean, you could. You have to have enough parents go to board meetings and say, listen, freak jobs, either straighten this out or you're all gone. You have to pull a Festus, city council thing on them. But that's much harder to do. But if you're talking about something that is privately funded, there is way better chance of you having accountability there. Because again, if you just pull the kids out and the school's awful, they'll go under. So what is this? What are they speaking of? What Babylonian are they talking? And I just found that again, folks. It's been a few years. I interviewed the school board president of Camden County Schools and asked her about superintendent, why you have a superintendent, assistant superintendent, and all their staff. And she point blank said, I have to do this. We have to do this. The schools have to do this because there are so many rules in place. You have to check off a retarded amount of boxes before you start educating the kids. So you have to pay these people considerable amounts of money to come in to make sure your school is playing by all the rules before they even start educating your kids. How is that a winning formula? How is that a formula for success for your kids if you have to bring in a bunch of staff to make sure they're abiding by all the regulations that the state and the federal government places on them before you can even worry about teaching the kids something? That is not a winning formula. That is not a formula for success. That is a horribly failing proposition. And it again, that would be like me coming in and I go to walk through the door and they're like, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? And all the while I could have found safety hazards. We could have put together a program to improve ergonomics in this area, but I couldn't do it because some jackass outside is asking me a bunch of dumb questions. And so before I even get in the building, I have to jump through all these fiery hoops before I can even do my job. And that just doesn't breed a successful career. And it doesn't in public schools. If you have to hire a boatload of staffing to make sure you're playing by the rules set forth for public schools before you can even worry about teaching the kids, that's automatically a big bowl of what. Now, I'm going to play you a video from this. There's a gentleman in Britain was being interviewed as he was walking down the street. And he's going to give you his take on what he thinks the problem is in Britain. I heard some of the audio on another show, and I was like, this is great. I'm going to play this on the show tonight. A lot of stuff. I think he's there. He kind of realizes the problem. The UK and some of those people in the UK, the politicians can say that they have this diverse and yada yada government for the people, and they rank first in arrests being made for social media posts, stuff like that. So clearly not winning. Let me pull up the screen here. And then let me play this for you because I think you'll enjoy it.
What has persuaded you to come out today?
Well, we've driven up, my son and I, from Newbury because obviously we can see the state of the nation and there's a national emergency and we need to obviously think about the future. What kind of country are we going to have for our children? Or are we going to have a nation at all? Now, I'd rather live in a nation and not a market. Not a borderless international supermarket browsed by mutually hostile strangers. Not something that reduces us all to bargain hunters. We need to save the nation, and I think that Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain is the only credible vehicle to do that.
What was it that made you come over? What were the issues that pulled you to Restore, and what was the moment?
Well, you can see that there's obviously there's the bankruptcy of the general liberal idea. There's the fact that you get a sense that the Western idea and the ideas we've had since the Second World War are winding down themselves. And at the same time, You can't escape the fact that we appear to be morally as well as financially bankrupt across the West, across Europe and in Britain, that the whole system is in a form of crisis. If you like, what we used to call normal life has been replaced by a permanent state of emergency in terms of our social incohesion, in terms of demographic change, in terms of the fact that there appear to be no realistic solutions offered, and whoever you vote for, the same mad policies get continued throughout your life. And that's what I've seen the last 30 years. And if it goes on, we're finished.
So what does finished look like?
What does finished look like? Finished looks like an economic collapse. Finished looks like spending all your money on foreign wars when nothing works in the country. Finished looks like you can't get a job for being competent. There's no sanity even in recruitment. We have a competency crisis because for increasingly ideological and insane reasons, employment opportunities, even training opportunities are restricted. There's one news story after another about why, for political reasons, we're doing mad things that bankrupt the country, that basically park people's careers, that exclude talented people of genuine principle from any area of influence whatsoever. And taken collectively, this is the politics and economics of national suicide. So it has to stop. And there's increasingly a sense, not just in Britain, but throughout the West, that something has to change. And I think that's only going to build as we begin to see the devastating consequences of the latest round of reckless warmongering in the Middle East, which we should never have been involved in, but we're all going to have to live with those consequences. And from this summer on, we're going to see how bitter they are. And it's only going to get worse unless we change the system. And there's no real change that's offered by the parties of the forced consensus. That was the liberal establishment after the Second World War, and it doesn't work anymore, and it hasn't produced the utopia it's promised. It's produced a sort of hell on earth from which there seems to be no way out. But there is. There are people of genuine principle and genuine talent in this country. And the reason why so many people despair of that is because I think they've been systematically excluded from positions of power, influence, and professional advantage for ideological reasons that has bankrupted the country. But we have enormous human capital here. We're just not permitted to release it, because if you don't have the correct views, you don't get the job, you don't get any promotion. In fact, you might be harassed off social media and find yourself debanked, or at least your career is stymied. So what we need is a realistic economy, some return of human dignity to every area of life. Because, as I said, it hasn't just financially bankrupted us, it's morally bankrupted us too. And we're looking at a state where you're going to live in a borderless international bazaar, a placelessness, if you like, an international nowhere land, where nothing means anything, nowhere seems like home, and where the essential value of human life is replaced with price, such as we see in awful things like surrogacy or 0 hours contracts, or the increasing degradation of, what you call a work-life balance. Finally, how many people actually do work? How many people are now dependent on the state, directly or indirectly, to the point where those people exceed the ability of the nation to actually make money? This is an economic doom spiral. And so the more that you look at the problem, the more you realise that really we are facing a national emergency. And if you are going to take on the duties of the state, something more than self-interest or printing money for your own political friends, we need to do better than that. We need to take seriously the depth of the crisis that we're in, and we need people of genuine principle and talent to address that. And I think we've found them under Rupert Lowe and in Restore Britain.
And so, do you believe that essentially it's the rhetoric of blood, sweat and tears that we need in this country?
No, I don't think we need any rhetoric at all. You see, that's partly the problem. For the last century, we've been ruled by the political technique of the liberal system, which is basically the rule by media. And what you do then is you use slogans and you use concepts and you attach people's hopes and dreams basically to messages for products that you're never going to deliver. That's how we're ruled. We are sold dreams. Our desires are stimulated by, if you like, the kind of ruling consensus. But none of these things ever happen. And instead what happens is what the elites want to happen. And so we get involved in these terrible economic doom spirals. We see the quality of our lives degraded as margins are shaved. Everything's subject to shrinkflation now. It's not just your chocolate bars that are getting smaller. It's the value of your wages. It's your ability to earn a living. It's the kind of job that you have to do so. Usually a kind of dignity-free environment, right, where you're slowly choked to death by the lanyard and its terms and conditions. So if we have just more empty rhetoric, we're not going to get anywhere. You need credible people of genuine integrity and experience and ability who are committed to some higher purpose than themselves, than their own personal enrichment or their own mad ideological faction. We need a sense of higher purpose to see beyond the predicament that the rule by media has delivered us into, because it's delivered us all into a fantasy world that's turned out to be a nightmare. And those adverts, if you like, for that system that Francis Fukuyama described as the end of history, the liberal system, he said, periodic elections plus cheap consumer goods. And that was the final verdict on the organisation of mankind, and we could never do any better. Well, it hasn't delivered, has it? The elections have delivered political paralysis in Britain and in France and in Germany, the major powers of Europe. And so what's that electoral system doing? It's ground to a halt. And the economics of this, if you ask conservatives who basically market worshippers, if you sit next to them and say, look, you've destroyed our nation, replaced it with a series of light industrial sheds increasingly staffed by third world migrant labour, what has that conserved? It's demolished everything. Everything that they claim to believe in about Burke and his little platoons, about traditional communities and traditional values, has basically been suborned to market worship and pure profit. We need something more than money. We need something more than empty ideological slogans. We need real change for people's real lives, for a change. And I think the crisis that the West generally is facing, politically, diplomatically, morally and financially, gives you the opportunity to make the kind of deep-rooted change that you need to save the nation.
And where is it you think that reform has fallen into, these traps are falling for this? Because obviously you've chosen restore over reform.
Yeah.
And you've already mentioned the Iran war, and they obviously want to back the Americans.
Well, this is a difficult question to approach if you're not the kind of sad person with no life like me who actually gets into this. But the Americans didn't choose that war freely on their own, did they? They've admitted severally, their own chief diplomat, Marco Rubio, and many others, the leader of the House and so on, have said that this was a war for Israel because Israel was going to launch that war. And so the real fundamental question is who basically rules the United States, because that war is definitely not in the national interest of the Americans. In fact, I personally predicted this along with others at the beginning of January. This has led to a strategic defeat of the United States. It's broken its military presence, its credibility. It's now seen as agreement incapable. That means in diplomacy, nobody believes your promises. So no one's going to make any deals with you because you constantly break them. And what's worse with that, you then assassinate the people that you were trying to make the agreements with in the first place. Incidentally, the Straits were open before you did this, and you killed the man who placed a religious prohibition on the development of nuclear weapons, And then your big idea is to bomb everybody so they love you. I mean, this is insane. It doesn't make sense. There's no interest in the national interest at the political elite level in the West, whether it's in the United States or whether it's in Britain or whether it's in Europe. And that's the reason why these political parties are seeing themselves decline dramatically in popularity, because they're not delivering for their own people. The way that they rule is for the interests of the rulers, not the ruled. And you can see that there because these wars are mad. And it's not just the Iran war. These wars are mad from the point of view of the national interest of any Western nation, because it didn't deliver anything for them other than misery and chaos. And in fact, if you look into the history of regime change, not only did it come about because of Benjamin Netanyahu saying that he wanted the West to replace diplomacy with a war on terror from 1979, but when it went on to do this, what did it produce? The reason we have a mass migration crisis in Europe is because of the wars in the Middle East that the United States has wholeheartedly fought, which serves only the grand strategy of the Israelis. That's the reason why you had millions of people come into Europe in 2015 from Syria. That's the reason why, as Colonel Gaddafi predicted in 2010, he went on French television and said, if you kill me, Europe will turn black. And then in Operation Odyssey Dawn, when they did kill him, when Hillary Clinton and David Cameron killed Gaddafi, rather brutally, Europe did turn black because Libya was a gateway that wasn't open then. And so was Syria. And then so was Iraq. And so when you smash these countries, what happens? People flee and routes are established, and that becomes a business. Mass migration is a criminal enterprise. It's a racket. People pay thousands of dollars to be shipped into your country. This becomes a parallel economy. It's part of the corrupting influence of the business of mass destruction itself. And when people are beginning to see that now, because they're seeing that it's going to make changes in their pocket, the price of their petrol, the availability of their food through the scarcity of fertilizer, the cost of living is going to go up. Governments like the Labour Party, and probably like Reform, are going to borrow more in order to defray those costs, which will further devalue the value of your money, making it harder and harder to survive. It's a death spiral. Fundamentally, the decades of regime change wars that I've seen have changed one regime more than most, and that's our own. Because I remember when we used to live in a sane, functioning, stable, and relatively happy country. And now it's terrible. And all these policies have been undertaken which have created this nightmare. And it's the political consensus that was formed after 1945 that's done this to us. And the reason why none of these parties have any answers to these problems is because they are the problem and not the solution. And if they ever name the fact that it's their policies that have caused this, they're finished. And I think reality's making that argument now, and they know they're finished. And this is why you see the elites in the United States cashing out through series of well-documented financial trades timed to statements always made on Fridays just before the markets closed, like we saw yesterday, saying that peace is coming. This is so bad that the Federal Securities Commission is investigating the President of the United States and is in a circle for insider trading now, because it's obvious. So you're ruled by something that looks very much like a fanatical crime syndicate that does things that destroys everyone's lives, makes these wonderful promises to them, whether from the left or the right. But in the end, what you get is chaos and war and open borders and mad slogans and the outright denial of reality. And it's not good enough because we have to live in the mess they made.
What's the Twitter for Frank?
Yeah, the Twitter is Frank Reiter, R-I-G-H-T-E-R, Frank Reiter. And inevitably, depressingly, I have a Substack. And I do videos for LifeSite News.
Well, I'll tell you something. That is hard to argue with anything that man said at all. And I don't think I don't think any of us could have put it any better. And he's looking at it from a UK perspective. And they do have a massive issue with migration. And it's so nice to hear someone, and I know he's not the only one, but hear someone say it out loud that the U.S.'s foreign policy and going into smashing these countries, causing these people to flee and take up root, and it has become a criminal activity. People paying thousands to get, smuggled in or whatever to a European country and running a parallel economy. And it's nice when you hear someone from one of these other countries come out and say it, and say how that it's rhetoric, empty promises, empty slogans, propaganda. They are the cause of the problems, and they can't admit to it, because if they did, the whole game and the table gets flipped over. All right, I'm sure all of us have seen the picture where it shows the elite playing a game and people are like bent over and the game board is on their back, right? We're like the table. And it's like all you have to do is stand up and the game gets flipped over. But you live in a country like the UK and they have people terrified to speak out. Because if you put the wrong post on social media, there's a good chance that you will be arrested. You might face a little jail time, or you'll face fines or whatever. So the people that created the issue will create rules against you dissenting against their choices, and then criminal and make it a criminal activity. They will make it a criminal activity to dissent to what the elites are doing to them. Now, you think about it. You think about that, right? and this has been going on for a while in Europe. I get that. This is not something new. It's just every time you turn around, you see more arrests and more arrests, and you see the numbers just constantly going up. They have a system in place. They promised a utopia, and it's so good that if you speak out against it, you could be arrested. You could be arrested because it's such a great system. How dare you speak out? How dare you say anything against this thing that we've created? And it's so good. We don't want you to get people hating on our stuff. So we'll arrest you. What system have you ever heard of that's so good and so good for the citizens of that nation that you arrest people for speaking out against it? I've never heard of a good system, a liberty-oriented system that would arrest people for speaking out against it being so good. Generally, the most unpopular things get the most dissent. And unpopular in a way that is not good for its people of whatever country. That's generally where you get the most dissent. And I think another part that I love that he said, the American people didn't push for this war with Iran. The people in the Trump administration outright admitted, hold on, I might have a sneeze coming here. Excuse me. But they outright admitted Israel was going to start this war. They had to jump in. They full on admitted that. And, oh God, another sneeze, really? But they full on admitted to the fact. And then we create legislation here in Missouri against, anti-Semitism. Because, again, if the people really wanted this, if they really wanted to be at the beck and call of Israel and take out these 7 countries, if this was so popular in the United States, you wouldn't have to create legislation against anti-Semitism or supposed anti-Semitism, boycotting Israel. If the people of this country wanted these wars, you would not have to stifle dissent. That's common sense. I'm not that smart. I don't say things that are groundbreaking. This should be common knowledge. This should be logical in the minds of the majority of people. That if the will of the people is being followed, your government should not have to write a rule and criminalizing behavior if everyone's following along and saying, great job. Happy we elected you. Thanks for fulfilling your campaign promises. I mean, FDR, Woodrow Wilson, it started with Lincoln, right? Well, actually, it started with the Alien Sedition Act. Then Lincoln arresting reporters for talking smack about the Civil War. Woodrow Wilson stifling dissent on World War I. I mean, it's happened throughout this nation's history. People don't talk about it very much, but it has happened several times. And it just rears its ugly head again and again. But now it is one government in particular. I won't say nation, because I don't believe that the majority of Israel thinks Netanyahu is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they feel like there should be laws against anti-Semitism. But the government of Israel has bought its way into legislating against your natural rights. The natural right of self-expression. A foreign nation has gotten its dirty fingers into the legislative body and said, we don't want people talking smack about us, and here's a lot of money, do something. And then you get the media bankrolled as well. You get the mainstream media bankrolled in it, so they're not going to talk smack either. And some people think there are some Americans who fall in line with this and think this is a good thing. I believe AIPAC and even the Republican Jewish Coalition probably should be registered as foreign agents. I am with Thomas Massie on that. That our government, and it's been taken over for a long time, and the writing's been on the wall, and the evidence has been there, but now it is right there in your face. If you decide not to see it, that's a you problem. Because those of us with a functioning brain see it for what it is, and we speak out about it. Then you have state legislators in Missouri who are all about this anti-Semitism type bill. Again, Republicans, what are you doing? The Republicans that supported this, what are you doing? It begs the question, where do their loyalties lie? Do they lie with the people? Or do they lie with lobbyists and special interests and even foreign governments? Or the worship of a foreign government, a land that government and its people inhabit? Where do their loyalties lie? What's with all the grandstanding for a foreign nation in Missouri? You know, I posed a question the other day on social media that if China or Russia had spent that much money on a primary vote, people in this state and across the country would have lost their minds. But if people that look out for a certain foreign country named Israel do it, well, that's just fine because Thomas Massie was a Democrat. Who's living in reality? Because it's not them. People who think that's okay and people who ignore it or want to just, again, spike the football because Massie lost, those people aren't living in reality. Those people are living in the freaking Twilight Zone, whatever. But they are not, no matter what their words, their actions speak loudly. They are not for liberty. They are not for freedom. They are not for a constitutional republic. They are there as part of a cult, or they are there to get a $7,000 check, or they are there to enrich themselves, whatever way you want to put it, whatever they're doing. It is not for the betterment of the nations. And that's where self-interest, this type of self-interest, is degrading to its nation, because these people that are thought so highly of and are basically worshipped will sell themselves out, and they will devalue your currency. They will debase your currency. They will risk blowback. They will flood the nation with people from those countries who are probably not happy with our foreign policy. They will do a lot of things. And who gets punished? It's not the people in power. It's you and I. We get punished. How is that okay? How is that logical? How is that my freedoms? These same schmucks will go out in another little over a month and celebrate Independence Day. It's one of those things where it's like if I drive by someone and I see an Israeli flag and I see them celebrating Independence Day, I want to stop and go, do you think that through before you put that Israeli flag up? As you're celebrating Independence Day, when apparently our foreign policy is not independent and of itself, but greatly influenced by another nation. Are you sure you should be celebrating Independence Day? Sure that's what you should be doing? Or did you go to a church where your minister was flown to Israel to be taught how to propagandize its members into supporting all things Israel and teach them false doctrines? Or because you so badly want to show your support of a human being, the last name of Trump, and you dare not dissent. You dare not speak out against your cult leader, no matter that he's broken every freaking campaign promise he's made. Do you want to turn into an Austin Peterson and have this libertarian mindset and then come up with libertarian nationalism, but support attacking Iran? The only time you speak out is when tariffs are involved, because your swag comes in from other countries and that'll affect your prices. But everything else, you'll say, well, Trump's the most libertarian president we've had in a long time. If that's libertarianism, I don't want to be associated with that type of libertarianism. I don't want anything to do with that type of libertarianism. Non-aggression. The non-aggression principle, which most, actual libertarians believe in. So starting wars of aggression in other countries is not the non-aggression principle, and it's not libertarian. So I don't know what kind of good ganja you've been smoking, but you might want to lay off, because it's making you into a retard. I know you're not supposed to say that word, but that's the only way I know to describe it. Retardation. And just to add to that, I won't disagree with Mr. Peterson when he says that we need to focus locally. Yes. But when they come out and they attack libertarians like Scott Horton, saying they retarded a whole movement by focusing so much on foreign policy, that is also stupid. That's actually retarded. Because that foreign policy has put us in dire financial straits. So there's nothing wrong with getting together a group of people, a large group of people, and saying, these people are going to head off and educate people on this front, national and foreign policy. And this group of people is going to work on educating people on what they can do locally. And then you can attack two things at once. But just to say, don't pay so much attention to our foreign policy, only focus on local stuff. The thing is, if you focus on local, but your federal government is debasing your currency at an astounding rate and destroys the financial system because people aren't paying attention to what they're doing, the wars they're waging, and all the money they're spending over there, you're not going to fix anything. You're like, well, we have liberty-minded people in office in our city. Great, but they've wrecked the financial system. Now what are you going to do? And I'm not saying that's not an easy, I'm saying, I know that's not an easy thing to do, right? This is a multi-front war. Local, state, and national politics. You have to have people that fight on all those. You can't just ignore two and go for one. I mean, some people do. Cool. But if you're trying to make this big party, this big group of people, and you only focus local. I don't understand why you would do that. I think you look at it on multiple fronts and keep up with these things. I don't think you would just ignore one because that's retarded. But that's just me, and I'm ultra white and weird. And I'm a nerd about this type of stuff, so, I kind of look at a lot of different things. So maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm wrong about my whole stance on all of this. But I like to keep track of what the feds are doing because, as one of my coworkers said, they could mess up an anvil with a marshmallow hammer. And so I kind of keep tabs on the freak jobs at large in D.C. But I also like to keep track of what the schmucks, some of these conservative and Democrat schmucks in Missouri are trying to do as well. So there is that. All right, folks. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Again, thanks to all of you who continue to watch on YouTube, Rumble, or Facebook. And to those of you who listen via podcast or at molibertyradio.us, we greatly appreciate your continued viewership or your listenership and support for the show. So next week, Tom Martz will be back with our Martzist edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. And I'm sure I'd like to cover some of the amendments that will be going on the ballot in August and cover some of that and other Missouri news. But we always have a good old time when Mr. Martz joins us, and I hope you will be back to listen or watch it. That's going to do it. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. Central Time for another edition of the Missouri Liberty Report.